I mean, everybody takes notes differently. Obviously, you're taking notes your way. What we're going to do is go around the room again. This time, hopefully you'll remember your names. Whatever names you use, just be consistent. And then today we're going to be doing identity and difference. And I wanted to put it on the board because I have a feeling that no one's read it. Is that horrible, or have you read it? You've read it?
Yeah.
Well done. And still came to the class. Was Prof. Unbelievable. See, poor Grace goes, and say with Dane, they both go to the PhD seminar as well. It's much more serious, isn't it, there? It's very like priest eyebrows, you know, everyone. We're much more fun here. Okay. So.
Which man's eyebrows?
Yeah, it's scary, isn't it? In fact, why don't you begin?
Oh God, no. I'm talking myself.
You just have to say name, serial, bank account.
Right, okay. Anyway, Luke Robert Mason, 20 25 42. You want my PIN number? Or
yeah. It's the World Wide Web. That's why I mentioned that.
I'm doing Johnny's Media Art Philosophy practice course. Interested in transhumanism, but now looking specifically at what can I pull from the body and perceptually and manipulate, pulling sounds from the body, smells, touch and haptics, and playing with that this week.
Great. What were you doing in Berlin?
I was doing a CTM conference, which was it's Club Transmediale, which is part of Transmediale. The theme of the event was the Golden Age, and it was this idea of
that there was one.
One, that there was a Golden Age, but Golden Age thinking and how that affects culture today. So very quickly, there's a gentleman called Mark Fisher has this theory of flattening of time, and the fact that the cultural artifacts we deal with today are from multiple different times. And we can have, say, Sinatra and dubstep on our iPod, but there's no culturally defining music of this generation, because everything sounds like mid-90s rave. That wouldn't shock us. How do we shock our parents was the big kind of problem they had, and we were looking at.
How do we shock our parents?
Yeah, well, that was their problem? In terms of music and culture.
You missed my class because you knew how to shock your parents.
Right.
Sorry.
So no, it was to do with this thing about the difference between Beatles and punk was 15 years, and everything seemed to change. Whereas in the last 15 years, things technologically may have changed, but culturally it feels very similar. And we're just waiting for the event, something that's going to shock us, something that's going to feel like it defines this point in time. And it was all about identifying what are the things that exist in culture today which may define this, because it feels like we're in this point in time where nothing's really happening but everything's happening, if that makes sense.
Does anybody disagree with that?
There was a program last night presented by Danny Baker about albums, pop albums.
Right, okay.
It's really great, his knowledge is fantastic.
Danny Baker.
Yeah, what you were saying about that is quite true.
The personal reference is Simon Reynolds, who wrote Retromania.
Yeah.
Everything sounds like the past. So why does everything sound like Adele, and why does everything sound like Coldplay? And why does that sound so normal to our ear?
I put it down to the drugs people are doing.
Well, lack of was the problem.
Really? Well, everything does sound the same after you've done a few similar things.
I wonder how much that's about distance. We because we're in now, we can't define it. Whereas at a distance, things get attached to it. So
in the future, we'll look back at this.
Yeah, there will be a defining set. Yeah, well, yeah.
That's right.
We just had Facebook and Twitter. It wasn't involved me.
Other people will think this was the golden age. Yeah,
that's
okay.
Awesome.
My name's Jonathan there.
But do you go by Jonathan?
I go by Johnny. So.
See?
Yeah,
but without the H.
Without the H, yeah, Johnny without the H, J-O-N-N-Y. I'm doing part-time on the philosophy and assessments with Johnny Goldick. So my bank details, because I don't know. Because I've got many accounts. I'm interested...
Then you are someone to know, aren't you?
Yeah, I am.
You have many accounts.
Apparently so, yeah. interested in the loss of skills, looking at the degeneration of art-based skills from drawing and like craftsmanship, development of technology, how that's taken over, how things are seen virtually, and the visual impact of what it's doing on communities and society at the moment. Currently just looking and finishing off work based on looking at the 5 communist, spelled even wrong, countries. Just been to Cuba, where I've just with a colleague had a look at the culture there and how it's changing over to Western civilization, and looking on the impact of technology from there. That's really me at the moment in time.
Where in Cuba were you?
Well, it was a 2-part trip, so I was Cayo Coco for the first part, and then the second part was in Havana and Trinidad.
Oh,
So,
in Trinidad.
yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I'm Anna Lorenz, and I'm on the MA Fine Art full-time course, and it's quite interesting because Johnny was just saying he's looking at the work in relation to skills and how skills are not so apparent in fine art. I understood that right. I come from a skill-based background, and I try to kind of move myself almost not so much out of it, but just open up so so my work isn't just skill-based. So it's quite interesting to actually come from the other side and realize that skills sometimes can actually be a hindrance in some ways. And what I'm trying to look into currently with my work is really that understanding of space and how I can, in some sense, react to space and create work, but as well create space within my work.
Great.
That's it.
I'm Sarah Gowdy, I'm on the MA part-time fine art course, and I'm working with drawing and I want to make objects.
But the drawing you did today, which was a today of 15 years, right? That drawing took you 15 years.
No, the drawing I've been drawing for 15 years.
Okay. I was going to say that was a very long drawing.
Yeah.
To not wrinkle that paper.
But it feels like I've been doing the same drawing for 15
And have you?
It feels like it just looks like different each time. Yeah, so maybe I have been doing the same drawing for 15.
Interesting. And a lot of people saw it today. It was all graphite and sort of spine and round. That's a terrible way of describing this.
Perfect.
Okay. Really, you have to just kind of, you have to go see it. Yeah, it's much better. Yeah.
My name is Francesco. I'm from Italy. I'm doing a master in fine art, full time. I'm a painter, and I studied philosophy before, so I'm trying to bring that together. And I think this is the right place.
And what made you want to paint here, like in this room?
Well, the feeling that is inside here, and you know, the abstraction of the things we talk about.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, maybe I will just paint some faces.
Oh no, not faces.
We will see.
You're trying to get them away from faces.
And I had a question for Luke. You said there's no, you were talking about these years, and there's no definition of what we are doing, as you said. It's not definable. Did you say that?
Is it not one, sorry? It's
Non-definable, like, I mean, you said dubstep and all this kind of music so together, so you can't really define it.
Yeah, how do you define this age without referencing the past with anticipation of the future? It was this odd tension or suspension at the moment where it felt like that.
Is it about defining what we're doing now? Are you trying to do that? I mean, this period though. Okay.
Answer that now. That's your dissertation. Okay, good.
I'm Dane, doing MA Fine Art part-time in my second year. I'm interested in cognition and science of senses, and through my research I achieved that by looking at ideas of uncertainty and incompleteness through quantum mechanics, Gödel's mathematics.
As you do.
As you do, yeah. Alongside that, bring in ideas of authenticity. How is something authentic in simultaneous states of being? between zeros and ones and picking them apart.
So we have to get him out more.
It's my personal aim. He had 2 Cokes the other day.
That's good. Does everybody know who Gödel is? Does everybody know who Gödel is? G-O-D-E-L with umlauts over the L.
He was a mathematician.
He was a mathematician. What was his famous thing that he came up with? Do you know what it was called?
Incompleteness theorem.
Yeah, the incompleteness theorem. And does anybody have an idea of what it means to talk about an incompleteness? What is the incompleteness?
It's basically you use the Principia Mathematica,
Which was written by
formula
Bertrand Russell.
Bertrand Russell, which said that he locked down all mathematics into a well, made it complete, so it could do anything. But Gödel comes along and says it can't sort of reference itself, it can't prove itself, so there becomes a schism between proof and truth. You can't, there are things that could be true but you can't prove, and how numbers as patterns themselves can encode all sorts of different discourses and ways of thinking.
That's good.
Statements.
And so, coming off of that, I mean, we're going to get into that sort of sideways today, but he basically says that in any system, ever, including and in fact especially simple systems, there's always uncertainty at the base. So even in arithmetic, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, mathematics, like or easy maths, relatively easy maths, subtraction, addition, multiplication, division, always uncertainty. It does. You don't have to go to imaginary numbers. We'll get back to that, but that's good.
I'm Jakub. I'm doing full-time.
Did everybody hear who this was?
Jakub.
World Wide Web.
Jakub. There we go. My name is Jakub. I do full-time MA course here. I work around text and image, and those two working together, maybe opposite each other, maybe connecting with each other or separating each other. Yeah, so that's about it. I
But
like to check how
space.
Also space.
When you think about it, with yourself crunched into a bathtub.
Yeah.
Also, for those of you that have not seen Jakub's work, he normally has naked photos on there, which I think is very important. I just want to mention this as a
I have a lot of naked photos.
And you're single, is that what you're trying to say?
I'm single, yeah. Why not?
Really.
Desperate one is holding to anything,
See,
you know?
This is the real reason why the university wouldn't allow us to finally have CFAR.ac.uk. We have to have CFAR-BIAD.co.uk, i.e. come around through the side door. Does it work? Anyway, okay, thank you, Jakub.
My name's Stuart, first year part-time fine art masters, interested in place as a process. I sat on that side of the table last week.
Okay.
Please.
And are you finding, and is it changing your position now that you're over here?
Yeah.
Do you want to swap?
No. It's
And
useful to get to know
does this position make you think differently, you think?
It might. It's early days.
Yes. Right.
But it's, getting to know places.
Okay, thanks.
I'm Clovis, full-time fine arts. I'm actually trained, painting trained. But, right now I'm actually interested. I'm looking into, to understand, the imitation of, because I come from a different culture. So I try to blend myself into this thing because I have full of wine. I always challenge system.
Yeah.
And I always try to move,
So you're a troublemaker.
in a way, sort of.
Came to the right place. Yeah, that's good.
And I'm actually interested to look into, because my country is actually that was a time when we are once British. So we are very influenced. The whole system, the whole culture is very, it's like a template of the West. and I'm always full of questions. So I'm here to find the answer. Why we have to follow,
And what do you think so far? What's
So
your guess?
far, I think we are all still in the system.
Interesting.
When there is a structure, there's I'm kind of like trying to look into institute. Whenever the so-called institute, there's always a system, and everything's things kind of like since I try to look into the past, and always with it's a structure, it's an organized structure. So I'm kind of like looking into this thing.
Good.
I'm quite keen.
That's very good. That's very different than your comment last week. But that's good. I like this one. This is a good one. I mean, they're all good.
Hi, I'm Stella. I'm doing the MA course of Arts and Project Management full-time. I'm mainly interested in the film industry and how new media had affected the relationship between the audience and the movie-going experience, and at the same time how new media can be a part of festivals or smaller gigs in order to attract more people to interact or not interact, and if they prefer to do that or just stay home, and how this works in this new year.
So what do you think of what Luke was saying, that basically it's all 1990s?
I agree with him. I haven't really researched in that, but I agree that
Just because you're drinking
we
buddies.
Yes, I think that we cannot actually define this last decade because it's everything and nothing at the same time, as for music is concerned. So at the same time you can have Gangnam Style and David Bowie. So, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Do you think war has anything to do with this? I mean, it's a very violent decade. I mean, every decade's violent, but this one particularly seems to have its obsessions.
You mean how we
Bomb.
Understand war?
No,
How
war.
we-
How this country is involved with 3 different wars on 3 different fronts that they admit to. The U.S. is probably more. And I'm just curious, because often in analyses around culture, we're talking about identity, difference, often the whole role of violence seems to just get forgotten about. Not just violence with the wars, but sexual violence, domestic violence, this is upbeat tonight, it'll be very upbeat, but I'm just wondering the degree to which that ends up having something else to think about when one's making these general comments. You think that, because the year, 2000s, or noughts, or whatever they're called, I mean, no one can even talk about the decade, it's zeros, the noughties. Yes, exactly. And I would think in Cuba, for example, they have a very different take on it.
Cross, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's
Apart from the fact that people.
it's definitely different to what I expected. It's
Yeah.
definitely westernised now.
But it was westernized, then as well,
More so now.
in the sense there are nightclubs and stuff.
And it's, nightclubs closed. They've got this big thing now where everyone's wearing.
Clothes.
Yeah, I've been to it. Everyone's wearing British flags everywhere.
Really?
Everyone, the trend over there, you see someone with a Union Jack bag
Wow.
or a Union Jack t-shirt, and for some reason you're thinking, what the hell's going on? And everyone's got Blackberries and iPads over there, and with the setup how it is socially, it's quite a big, massive gap. Not like here. There's like a between poor and rich. Obviously, they say it's a big gap here, but over there it's more noticeable. You can travel out and you see it visually, but you still find people wearing these expensive clothes still, and they're living in holidays basically. And it's not nice.
Did you trade at all? Did you trade like clothes and jeans and things?
Yeah, well, what we did was we got told when we went over there, bring like cranes and books and pads and t-shirts that you want, and then we gave them. But it was amazing to see how it is. But you do wonder where they get the rest of this stuff from.
Because people have much better taste than what you're bringing over.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So they're bringing over these British flags.
I think, yeah, definitely. If you want to get a bottle of rum or something, bring a Union Jack, and I think they'll be further. But it's interesting saying about like the war, if it affects like media and films, like from second one was all propaganda, isn't it? I mean,
Okay, you're all upbeat group. It was all propaganda. A lot of it is.
Zero Dark Hours was coming out, isn't it? The American film, and we've got another one coming out as well, which is, very much the same. But that is the same over there. Everything's still very anti-American, no offense.
Oh well. Do they still have signs up that say, beware of the enemy within?
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's still a lot of that. But it's amazing, the graffiti over there is not sort of graffiti you see over here. It's very full of government.
Yeah.
Very, very much so. Which is kind of amazing when obviously the doctor's getting paid 25 pesos a week, and he's then selling hard radio and stereos in the side streets and extra cash, and he's a surgeon. Like,
yeah.
It's kind of amazing, but we still follow the support and the propaganda that they sort of produce. And your art is very different as well. So,
yeah. It is. Thanks.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Anastasia. I'm in arts and education full time, and I'm interested in puppets and exploring the idea of puppets and whatever I can find at the moment, like puppets and performance and puppet making. So it's a very new subject for me. So just.
What brought you into puppetry? What made you be interested?
I was interested in storytelling. Back in the days, I was a member of a storytelling group, and last summer I did a workshop in puppets. So I was really amazed, and I really liked this, and I just wanted to learn more. And when I came here, I didn't realize that I could have this opportunity, but it was somehow given, and it's like really
interesting. Have you ever read Benjamin, the Storyteller? Walter Benjamin. Take a look at it. It's kind of a. Well, we'll get back to that. But the Storyteller is a very interesting comment, remark. Also, same with his unpacking my library. I don't know how many people have ever unpacked their library. A, I don't know how many people have a library. B, the library that's not just on your Kindle. And C, the one that you can actually unpack and put on shelves. But okay, let's say get to that end point. What do you put next to each other on a shelf? And how do you actually unpack it? And it's the storyteller. It's a different form of storytelling. So you'll start noticing now with the books on. Grace?
I'm first year I keep saying part-time, I'm not part-time.
That's right.
Full-time, on the verge of a breakdown.
That's right.
I think so.
Note for all those that want to start their PhD.
Yes, don't do it. Full-time PhD, and I'm interested in the supernatural female mediumistic body, so the sexuality and performance of it, but how that also feeds into ideas around doubt and belief, how we come to kind of have our own beliefs in certain things, so whether that's based on experience and Wittgenstein's idea of uncertainty, and bringing in Rupert Sheldrake and his idea of morphic resonance. He kind of talks about fields of prayer as well as psychic phenomena, and he offers like an alternative point of view to it within the field of kind of physics and physical reality.
So why are you having a nervous breakdown? I'm not telling you.
It's Christopher.
It's Christopher. Oh, yes. Yes. Christopher, by the way, is the secret webmaster. Or not so secret at this point. Is it? Great. Okay. We'll let that lie then. It's not
he watches every single one of these guys. You know,
I'm sure he does.
Yes.
Sorry.
Hi, I'm Ivan. MA in Queer Theory, part-time, second year. What can I say, Johnny?
I don't know, I didn't know
Until
you
1 o'clock, everything was clear, pretty much. After my tutorial, actually it was an informal chat with Johnny. I really don't know where I'm going, so I think I'm taking myself to the relation between performance and augmented reality and the audience body. it's really cloudy.
All right. So what about bondage?
It's still there.
that actually,
It's
that's
still-
not just in the air.
It's still there,
Uh-huh.
as it was this morning.
Is that bad? That talk about
No, but then I'm still in investigating self-bondage, self-harming, and self-rationing, how they relate together.
Great. And that will have some impact on the audience. Question.
Yes.
What was his name?
For sure, it will have impact on my body.
You know Ron Athey's work.
Yeah.
And then
And Dominicans.
no, but there's another guy. I can't think of his name. It's still on my head. Who did a lot of bloodletting on stage. Franco Bacon. Okay.
Yeah.
Also
they,
Italian.
They didn't really change my point of view.
Oh, not at all.
But I find Franco earlier work
Yeah. More interesting.
more interesting. Yeah, that's it.
That's it. Yeah. That was very good, considering you now changed after 1 o'clock. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Actually, I'm not sorry. But, I am tiny bit sorry.
You can feel the tension.
It was a wonderful class.
I can
In
cope
with
with it.
anger, out with love, as Henry says.
So who's the next person you want to tie up?
Steal myself.
That's right. That's good. Yeah, great.
I'm Kate. I'm a serious interloper from another institution. It's really lovely of you to let me come. My work's on Edward Bond, the dramatist, and I'm also interested in audiences' bodies and how you make them be in their bodies, as opposed to sort of mesmerised by different types of signs. So I'm interested in how signs relate to each other and how they affect us.
And therefore how an audience takes on a singularity, like a single body?
Yeah. Cinema audiences that, especially in Spielberg films, that sort of twitch in sync.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you two have a little bit to talk about it.
I finished my master's,
Name?
my MA. I'm Kirsten. I finished my MA last year. I'm interested in, I make short films. I'm interested in editing and the process of editing and how you can kind of change narratives and change meaning through the edit.
That's great. And where do you show your work?
Not enough anywhere really at the moment. It's on my to-do list.
It's hard to.
Yeah, it's definitely.
This is where you guys need to break it. With project management comes in. Yeah, it's difficult. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Hannah Honeywell, doing fine art full time. So this last weekend I went to a symposium at the Tate called Charming for the Revolution, a congress for gender talents in wilderness.
What was it called?
Charming for the Revolution, a congress for gender talents in wilderness.
I was there with us.
And it sort of blew my mind and was massively exciting. So I'm interested in starting a gender binary-free revolution. And I'm going to get you to join.
Do you know the group called FAG?
Yeah.
Feminist art. I think they're feminist artists. I don't know what G stands for, but they're against the binary, and they took on the name FAG, which irritated a certain section of the community. And they are hilarious. You check it out. They're these Canadian artists.
But it was a Spanish philosopher there called Beatrice. Anyway.
I don't know.
Beatrice.
She was basically talking about the gender binary from Foucault's bio-power, the uterus and then the sperm. And that since the contraceptive...
The uterus and the sperm? You mean the egg and the sperm? Uterus and the cock. I mean, you know, really, honestly.
Okay, yeah, so it would be the egg and
apples and oranges.
So the biological. So
sorry, that came out completely wrong.
Translation would be in that way.
That's what you're
So you're saying, yeah, since the contraceptive pill came in and we started to be able to sort of chemically control our bodies, that gender could be, the gender binary could be dissolved, and so her thought is that if we, the question that you could think about is maybe if we got rid of the male-female gender, so when you're born there's no definition of your birth certificate, how would the world change and how would we operate differently? So that's what I'm thinking.
And was it well attended?
Yeah, yeah.
Great, thank you. You also did this Grey's Anatomy.
Oh yeah, Grey's Anatomy, which is all combined with this and thinking how can link it all together and start a revolution.
Started here now.
Hi, I'm Tanya. People know me like that, but my actual name is Panayota. I am on the MA Arts Practice and Education. I came here out of curiosity just to see how this results. I am looking at how technology can affect the quality of our lives. I looked at the barcode because I wanted to see how objects are identified. And I thought that people are sometimes can be considered numbers seen by society like that. And I wanted to see a more natural perspective, if there is any.
And by natural, you mean?
I mean,
what could be more natural than
what
numbers?
else can identify people apart from numbers? And lately, because I thought I didn't like this fact, I didn't like the fact that people are using too much technology, and it affects my life. I mean, I can see myself being in this lonely room and being on Facebook all the time, and I'd like to change that. So I can see the fact that technology is something good and big that can give easier life, but at the same time I want to see like how people see that.
That's great. Welcome to the group.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Joan, and I'm also on the art practice and education course. My work is changing a lot at the minute. I've been exploring working with students in a classroom where I work, in a school where I work in Northamptonshire, and through the project that I did for my dissertation, I started to, well, this thing started to happen where the students were interacting with the different objects that I put in the classroom, and so I'm now trying to explore the idea of pedagogy of objects, maybe how objects might teach us or our interactions might influence how we think, and then also how then students interact with each other and learn from each other as well.
And I'm just thinking about Yvonne's work and then objects. I mean, a lot of the work that Yvonne, if you've seen his work.
Some during a tutorial, yeah.
So some of it has to do with, well, we were talking about bondage, and of course bondage includes, let's just say the basic version, with ropes. Now would you consider that an object? What part is is this the object? Or is something that is already making its mark an object?
I think that's the thing I'm trying to define at the moment, whether it's like an art object. Like, I have this idea of, you know, what if we put Mona Hatoum's big black cube in the middle of the classroom? What would happen? Or, you know, is it a pen that we think about? Is it a chair?
So something that seems sort of self-effacing and sort of doesn't seem to have a presence. It's just sort of sitting there. That's the object you're talking about.
Yeah, or for example, my students they've made things like really sort of lo-fi kind of sculptures, and then I got them to place them where they thought they would like to go in the classroom, and then other students would come and change and move the pieces around. It's this kind of process of layering and building up.
Great.
Interaction.
How old are the students?
some of them were 11, 12, and others were about 13, 14.
Interesting age.
Yeah.
Great.
I'm Greg Dunn. I'm on the MA part-time. I'm in my second year. I haven't made anything since last year.
It's all right. You can still sit here.
No, but actually one of the reasons I came was to stop making, to be honest. So it's working. I'm principally interested with the geo-emotional connection the body has with the landscape. And I looked into Leslie Stephen's Empirical Sublime. You know Leslie Stephen, that was Virginia Woolf's father, mountaineer, 19th century, and I was interested in sort of masculinity around it and the extremities of that. And another guy that was from the 1980s called Mo Antoine, born in Kidderminster, was a great mountaineer, died young, but lived life to the full in his short life, and summited lots of mountains around the world, saved people's lives, Chris Bonington, for example, totally accredited. But that's my connection with the landscape, geo-emotion. I went to Japan last year for 3 months and learned how to make paper. And my interest in membranes and skin sort of translated to paper quite nicely. And yeah, I'm interested, as I say, in membranes, and now I'm interested in the embodiment of the extent. Richard and Stephen Kaplan's idea of potential and scope, be it conceptual, be it visual, be it in flat, be it in an open landscape.
When you say embodiment, could that count as corporality?
Yeah, and I've used that.
So you could
actually,
back to the question of the audience.
Yeah.
Could that be the embodiment of an extent, do you think?
As far as I'm really interested in body memory and how the body remembers movement for performers and so on, dancers. And actually certain movements, there are therapeutic methods where people will just have certain recreations of certain movements when they were children, for example, that will bring something up, And dancers, people like Wayne McGregor, if you've heard of him, wonderful choreographer, he uses that kind of thing with his work. And that's the body actually remembering things, and really like that, actually. Does it forget? But it's changed again at the moment. I'm thinking about the skin and membrane again as the cinema screen being skin.
That's great.
And the memory there.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Amy. I'm on the Fine Art MA, also my second year, part-time. I make videos and video installations that explore the urban environment, particularly like filming buildings, for quite long periods of time sometimes. I'm quite interested in the buildings sort of revealing themselves over time, so these inanimate objects or things revealing themselves and changing. And I'm starting to kind of explore how I can maintain people's attention when I present these films that are about time as well. So I've been looking at how to project in the space, make play around the scale, multiple projection, sound, that kind of thing, to see how I can make people watch them.
Oh. And do you find that the films have more of a resonance if they're in a gallery or in a cinema?
Yeah, I tried it in a cinema the other day actually.
Which cinema?
Well, it's called the Artrix. It's where I work in a college, and they've got a theatre as part of it, so that's how I was able to get in there. So it's a theatre stroke cinema. So I went in there and presented my work in there.
What did you think?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I was on my own, which is nice actually. I couldn't let anyone else.
The audience, the director. It's like the Mikado. You're all roles in one. Yeah.
But yeah, it was great. It was great seeing it at that scale, and I guess because you're not aware of the space, are you? Because it was dark, and so it just felt like it was me and the screen. So that was interesting. I liked that.
Yeah, I think size is important. Yeah, good.
I'm Michaela. I'm not an official student.
Did everybody hear who this is? Yeah. Michaela.
Yeah. Well, I'm here because I'm interested first of all, and yeah, I'm thinking about working towards the PhD, so it helps me be in this class. And I'm interested in analyzing how our mind and our way of living and doing art is influenced by the environment around, and especially the link between how or the capitalistic society influences our way of thinking, way of imagining things, and yeah,
Great.
tend to visualize our reality, our goals, our dreams, our mind, really.
Excellent. Thank you. Any questions before we launch into the insanity of the summary? Okay. Yes? You can do it. What I wanted to do today, first of all, I wanted to re-announce in case you hadn't gotten the announcement. Michaela, maybe you can take Francesca's seat.
Sure. Okay.
Do you mind that she's taking your seat? Saying sorry is always better than asking for permission. Okay. First of all, for those of you that are interested in applying for the PhD, may I remind you that I'm open, to listen to whatever it is, or to take a look at your proposals. But you do need to do a proposal. There is an application tucked away somewhere on the nether regions of the difficult to understand BCU website. I don't know, it's under research or something? Right? Oh, you sent it around, okay. Don't forget to do that. I mean, it's like, that's important. Second of all, there are these two fellowships that I've mentioned before. One's a practice-based one, mainly, and one's a basically the HRC, so it's more of a non-practice-based environment, though you probably could get some practice in there. There's a third one I just came across by the British Philosophical Society. They have a AHRC type. It's the same amount of money, is what I'm trying to say here. They want someone who wants to combine performance and philosophy. That's who they're looking for. So that could be interesting too. So I sent that around as well. So I hope that you've seen various things, and just keep going, despite what Grace says.
Sorry, yeah.
No. It's a crazy thing to do, your PhD, but I think it's worth it in the end. Okay. First of all, what I wanted to also do before we begin on Heidegger is to mention what it is to be a master's, so you really get what you're doing here. It's not that there are 7 things you have to do and now go off and do them, but you need to understand what is sort of at issue here, what's at stake, and why this class is a master class, and what that means to be a master class. The first thing is that a master is like going to a big banquet. And you eat, and you eat, and you eat, and you eat, and you eat until you're full. In fact, you can even eat beyond that. You just eat until the gun goes off, and then you have to stop and you have to hand in a dissertation. And that's kind of what happens. That's kind of the general scheme. So if you sort of get into it, allow yourself to try as many foods as possible. It's one of the reasons I asked you to all introduce yourselves. You're coming from very different backgrounds, and yet we're all at the table. It's a big table. It's like the King Arthur table, so it extends into the, off the table. Did you know that King Arthur's table is the size of a football field? I thought that was all very interesting. Small detail that only I seem to think is interesting. But anyway, so we're all at the table. And if you have questions, don't hold back, particularly in terms of how complex this gets in relationship to your own work. Because if it's not speaking to your own work, then it's not working. And that's just how it is. And so I always find it an honor to teach, and I enjoy, obviously enjoy it, but it would be, I'd be not doing you a right service if I just gave you the 7 things you need to know and you go off and know them. So the point here is that allow yourself to float away or come back or paint or whatever you want to do, however you want to take your notes. But also to remember that it is involving a discipline. And by discipline, which is the second thing you need to get a sense of as a master student, a discipline does not mean, or anyway ought not to mean, or in any case fight against it if it does mean it, it shouldn't mean closing down thinking. It gives you tools. It gives you sides of a pool that you can push off on and do backflips. But you need to know that there are rules of the game, as it were. That's why the first semester was really trying to get you to think dialectically. Because that's a very specific way in which most knowledge in a Western environment is ingested. It is in the air, and you need to be you need to be a little bit more clear. That's why we did it, and a lot of you did, you know, wildly well. Find your papers, by the way. They're now with Bridget. If you need them, and if you're obsessed, then I can send them to you. I just got sidetracked myself. Sorry about that. Anyway, this semester is different, because what this semester is doing is it's saying that there is something about the media time, the networked age, that's also in the air, that also is like a viral issue. In fact, it is asking you to think virally, which is a very different way of thinking than to think like an atom. Like there's things that are very tiny and you go down to the smallest dot and you find it and then you build it back up. It's asking you to understand that there's a disciplined way of thinking about something that we're going to call immersive philosophy, where you dive into it, but where you dive is maybe still the surface. So there's no depth. As deep as you go, you're still at a surface. You have to keep thinking about the notion of spatiality that allows you to think that image. So if I ask you to jump into the water and go to the banquet, there's no table at the banquet. There's only the table at the seminar. There's no ground. There's only a surface. And I know that has been plaguing a few of you, though maybe plaguing you less these days. But just think about a surface, or to put it slightly differently, think about something that has no depth. So if you dive into it, you're still just diving into the surface. Just keep with that view. Are there any questions so far before I really launch into the complication of this? No? Okay. So what I asked you to look at last week was Deleuze and Guattari's notion of the rhizome. And what I think we came away with, or what I hope we came away with, was that, as you know, that there are these 6 principles. It had to do with mapping, it had to do with consistency, it had to do with, I'll never be able to say this word, decalcomania. Yes, yes, decalcomania. Yes, and what is that?
Don't ask me.
But you said it so well. Does anybody know decalcomania? Has to do with the tracing, but it's actually how the trace leaves. I should think of a way of explaining this. Anybody who has a tattoo, who it's a stencil, it's a transfer, but it's the negative of the transfer. So that's important to have a thought about it. So if you think about it, you know, you got your little tattoo, you know, and it's on your, you know, I don't know, arm or let's say your shoulder. There it is. And then what they do is they put something on it, and then they put it on your, you know, body, and then they peel it off, and then what's left, they take their little ink gun and they fill it in. That's more or less how the tattoo. So the decalcomania is when you pick this up, what's left is the trace of the trace. Do you get that? Another way of thinking about this is that when you have a tattoo, and let's say you hate it after a while, so you decide you're going to have it lasered, right? Then there's a little trace of the trace of, so it's all these like the trace of the trace of the trace of the trace.
And the map, who is the map? Is our body map, or the trace of the trace of the trace?
Now, the map is the flight that one goes on, or the journey that one goes on. I mean, Foucault, Deleuze, Guattari, they call it a flight, a line of flight. But it's a journey, but it's not a journey that has a rule. It's a journey that makes sense. So it's the way in which the sense is being created. So the thing that I hope that some of you came away with from last week was that the rhizome, R-H-I-Z-O-M-E, the rhizome, which is like a seed that goes across the surface, doesn't have any depth, doesn't have any width, it's like this, the file, that this thing, this rhizome, creates a route, creates a path.
If you go in and you don't know where
Yeah,
you're going.
you don't know where, but you don't not know where you're going. It's not like you're blindly stumbling here and there and just in whatever. It's that you're in an MA class and you're at a banquet. And you go, maybe I'll try that over there. Or maybe I'll try that over there. So it's not like it's all things possible in the middle of everything. Loud. Just kidding. I thought you were going to paint. I'm sorry. But what I was going to say is that the point is that you need to get a sense of what this kind of movement is about, so that every part of your body, every part of your senses has some kind of movement to it, but there's no depth to that movement. There's no, another way of putting this that Deleuze and Guattari say, there's no meaning behind the meaning. There's only the is. There's only the here, now. There's only this kind of thing called is. Or to put it slightly differently, there's only the present. Now when I say there's only the present, that doesn't mean that there's never been a history, or there's not a future. It's not a linear thing. It's not like you go past, present, future. That's when you were children, you didn't realize. This is, like the present sits at the, I'm sorry I don't have a proper blackboard, or whatever, a whiteboard. So I'll draw it this way. So we have, I draw something that looks like an hourglass. This dot here, that's the present. This is the past, this is the future, and this is the elsewhere. Now this kind of concept is very different than the concept that you might have been used to before, where you had, you kind of like were born, like telos. I gave this lecture, I told a couple of people at Central St. Martin's on Monday, and I kept getting corrected because the student who was Greek is saying, telos, what's telos? And I was like, oh, telos, of course. Anyway, yes. Thank you. Okay, so this is a very different way of looking at this, because if we fold down the future and the past together, then I can go from the past to the future. All I have to do is figure out how to do that. All I have to do is go through what they call the wormhole. So you have a now, a present, and then you have this thing that falls outside of the remit of the present, this kind of reach, this cone, will be a spatial cone. I'll get back to this later. That's not really what I'm going to get into. The reason I'm mentioning this is so that you get a sense of how something can be here, now, so here spatially, here in terms of geography, and here in terms of time, this instant, this now. Now, scrolling back to Hegel, when you remembered him, his whole thing about the here, remember his thing was, if I'm here, and I walk over to where Hannah is, then I'm not here any longer, right? So you're there, and if I get up and I walk over to you, I'm still here. I'm never outside of my here. I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. I can't get the here off. you know, it just stuck to me. I can't do anything with my here. It's always here. So Hegel has this whole argument. You know, how do you deal with time then? If you're always stuck in here, then how do you get out of that? And his whole argument was this dialectical thing about, I'm not going to go through the entirety of it because we did that last time. But to get out of the here meant that for Hegel, he starts with the now, or the no thing, the thing, and he puts it against the nothing, and you take it together, and that creates the first form, which was intuition. You remember that? Remember that whole wonderful series of concrete concepts. So you start with the now, and then he says, actually, the now is immediate. That is saying not mediated, im-mediate. The now is not mediated. So he says that in the immediate that's not mediated, what happens is that you lose the present. And then, in fact, what he goes further to say is that you can never get to the present. The present is always escaping. The minute you get to the present, it's future or it's past. And for anybody who sees this as sort of commonsensical, well, you are living in a Hegelian world. I mean, and that Hegelian world is the basis of modernity. That notion that the present can escape, not only can escape, only escape. Now, of course, with Marx, as I tried to explain in the last term, his argument was, well, the problem with that whole position that Hegel's saying is that the dialectic should be turned on its side. So the process becomes history, that becomes the ground, and that ground is used to discuss and to give weight to the materiality of here now. So that's a very important move that Marx makes. So he would, of course, be very opposed to what's being said about, you know, the argument that there's nothing happening, it's only last, you know, 1990s, because he's saying every material reality has a reality, every one, whatever that is. And that one is being recreated or replicated or represented, represented. But still, this notion of the present keeps escaping. Now, what Deleuze and Guattari are trying to do, and Heidegger and Nietzsche and Lyotard and Einstein, we're going to go through this little group of comrades in this side of the argument. They're trying to show that the present is here, but this here is not the kind of here that you can never get out of. It's a plane, P-L-A-N-E, it's a plane of what they call a plane of immanence, I-M-M-A-N-E-N-C-E, a plane of immanence. So it's like the magic carpet. It's a big magic carpet, and we're all on it, like a stingray. You ever see those things? They're beautiful. Although if you see them up close and there's no glass between you, they're less beautiful. I just want to mention that. I thought about that when I was learning how to deep sea dive, and the scuba instructor was going, like, no kidding. Like, how do I get away? That's my question. I thought to myself, that's the last time I do something like that, like scare myself to death, because there's this enormous, beautiful thing going, I'm going to kill you. Anyway, sorry. Anybody ever scuba dive? Like deep sea scuba dive? How do you get water out of your mask? They teach you, what they tell you is you're like 30 meters below water, and that you see the water coming in like this. I'm thinking, I cannot believe this. And then it's like here, and what you're supposed to do is push on the top of the mask and blow up against 30 meters of pressure. Now, I don't know what type of lungs you have, and I was smoking at the time, so my lungs weren't quite as powerful as they are now. But still, all what would happen when I did this was that it completely filled up with water. So it was like stingray, water, you know, and then of course you can't go up too fast, you get the bends. I mean, it's just, you know, not my cup of tea. I'd rather climb mountains. Anyway, I tell you this because the way in which one deals with what's lying to hand, you need to have a sense of how that's grasped, how you grasp it. It's lying to hand. Because how it's grasped is part of the picture. Now, like I was saying with Heidegger early on in his question concerning technology, what he argues is that the grasping is a techne. It's a technique, except it's not, it's techne in the Greek sense. And what does that mean, techne in the Greek sense? Yeah, that's right. It means art, but what does it mean? Sorry, you would also know this. Art, science. Yes, but what, I mean, art, what does it mean to have techne? But what type of intuition?
Gathering.
But what type of gathering? Is this techne? Is this, like I just, I would do this, but it's going to follow me.
It's a symbol.
It's not that kind of gathering, or is it? You just reach out and say, I'll have one of those and I'll have one of those. How do you gather?
Absorbing?
Worrying about you guys. How do you think about your work? You're coming to think about how to create your work. How do you gather for your work? How do you make decisions about it? How do you bring something in? You just bring it in.
You assemble them and you can't.
You do assemble them, but what makes you want to take something and not take something else? When I go like so.
There you go. Right.
Yes, and how does that in framing work?
You leave something out.
And when you leave something out, what the thing that you're leaving out, maybe you left it out because it just didn't fit in, or why did you leave it out? What's that?
Instinct.
No, these people are completely against instinct. Instinct has absolutely nothing to do with pretty much almost everything. What's that?
It's the standing reserve, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's what it's
So
like.
what is that?
Yeah.
You're making a selection, are you?
Yes. And how does that selection happen? Isn't it terrible to say something now you also want to get a dress at say?
Sorry. How does the selection happen, did you say?
Yeah.
A desire, isn't it? It's linked to.
I just went like so. I'm going to move this other way because I sense danger. I go like this, and I have now gathered. Is that techne? No. Good. Make me weep. Okay, so what is techne then? It has to do with gathering. It has to do with standing reserve. It has to do with inframing.
So it's what's of use to you, what you need to use.
But what happens if what you're doing is Sarah's graphite drawing? How do you know when you're done? How do you know when you've gathered enough of the graphite? Because it's not about use in that sense. It's not about being useful. I mean, it's useful only in the most generous sense of the word somehow pulls things together.
So it's transformed.
So it does something. When you're sitting there like this, how do you know when to stop? When someone just pulls you off? Sarah, enough. How do you know when to stop this? What?
I'm not sure if you know, I said maybe you don't know.
Maybe you don't know when to stop. Yes.
When it makes sense.
When it makes sense. And when does it make sense? We're getting warmer.
Great
It's
point.
still
When
fairly
you don't know
cold.
that it makes sense, but somehow it makes sense. I don't know.
It's a great point in Paul Klee is talking about great point. And he says it starts as a black hole and everything is non-dimensional. And then when you see it, everything takes dimension. It becomes fully dimensional and it becomes
Warmer. Yes. So there, okay. So not to belabor this point too much because really we've got to get through a bit actually. The techne isn't just art, it's the art of the art. It's the way in which you do something. It's the way in which something is pulled together that makes it fit, that makes it, quote, make sense. Or another way of putting this, it makes it coherent. It coheres, makes it stick. And this is going to become one of the most important principles of networking. Because you're dealing with an environment that doesn't exist, except it does, that doesn't move, except it's completely moving. So it's paradoxical on many different levels, and you're figuring out how it creates links or assemblages so that it coheres. So what Heidegger argues in this, in a time period where the network is not really happening, in these two lectures, Identity and Difference, which you were asked to take a look at for today, what he says is that in order to understand the Techne, the logic of how something sticks together, you need to be quite clear about two things. One is that identity and how something gets its meaning is critical in the grasping. And the second is how that which is called difference is part of identity, not different from identity. And he says in lecture 1, truncated a zillion times down, that identity, first of all, has to do with how you establish a belonging, how something is set up so that it belongs. And what he basically makes as a general comment, very well put forward in Joan Stambaugh's early introduction. Normally I don't suggest that you read introduction, although I found myself saying this a lot. Normally I don't say you read the introduction, but I tell you to go read the introduction. But anyway, this the translation by Joan Stambaugh. What she says, and what Heidegger says later on, and we'll go through it in a mo, is that when you are talking about something cohering, you're thinking about how it belongs. Now, there could be a zillion reasons why it belongs. We're not, lineage. We're not coming up with, a genealogy as in a genus, species. We're not doing this kind of thing. We're just saying, how does this belong? All of these books are on this table, but the idea that the Douglas Adams Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and Heidegger the Event are on the same table and are given the same level, as it were, of interest would certainly send Heidegger rolling around, but that's my own little humor. You have to deal with Douglas Adams. But the other thing is that they do belong together. They belong somehow, and the question is, how come? How is it they end up belonging together?
Would you say that's in that you've given it purpose?
Possibly. Hold on to that for just 1 second. Just park that slightly. What's being said here is that let's just talk about ourselves for a minute. That's always an excellent place to start. Heidegger makes the argument that people really want two things. One is that people want to belong. They want to feel that they're belonging. They want to be loved. They want to belong. And the other is that they don't want to be bothered with anything. They want to be left alone. So it's this paradox of wanting to belong and wanting to just be. What I call the Greta Garbo moment.
Very Douglas Adams.
It's very Douglas Adams. It is actually. See?
After death.
Yeah, absolutely. So, absolutely wanting to belong, and the minute you're invited to the party, you think it's a terrible party, because why would they invite you otherwise? This kind of argument, right? Yeah. So, of course, he doesn't talk in these terms, so you have to know that I'm translating for you, because what he's saying, he starts off by saying the first form of an identity is A equals A. And for the 4 PhD students, he stepped through this. And the fact that I think we've had basically about 8 hours on A equals A, so try to not knife in the head, as they say in New York, which I think is a very unfortunate expression, just as an aside. But, I'll be talking to someone and someone will go, oh, knife in the head! Just like, oh, I've been over this long. I just see blood. Anyway, okay. Anyway, the A equals A. If you have A, and you have an equal sign, you have another A, they belong together. That A and that A stick together. And you go, uh-huh, for this he got paid zillions. A equals A. All right, now, he says with this notion of identity that this is the poorest form of identity you can come up with. This version is where everybody looks alike, or more or less looks alike. Like we're all dressed the same, like I've said before. I could come in here, or if I did come in here wearing a tutu or my scuba outfit, you would think I was doing something like a performance, or it wouldn't be the right comment, because in this moment we're all equal. We're all A equals A here. We all belong. We are wearing the same outfits. We look alike. There's no difference. Note the word difference. There's no difference. We're A equals A, and that's sort of how it is. A lot of identity politics was based on this view. Women's movement, gay movement, black movement. You must be the one thing that sticks together. You must belong. And if you don't belong, then you're not part of the club. You don't belong. You don't belong here. You're not part of that group. And what Heidegger says is that is a very limited notion. In fact, he goes further and says it's completely wrong. Notion of identity. Now, when you step back from that belonging, when you go, I want to belong, but I also just want to be left alone. I just want to be. I want to belong, and I want to long to be away from everyone. And I want to kind of do that at the same time. Now, that is not dialectics, although it could be understood that way. What he's doing there is he's setting up like a bubble, like an air bubble, in this equation A equals A. He's introducing the element of uncertainty. He's saying that in all A equals A, there isn't just the negative, which is what Hegel goes on about. There is the uncertainty. And uncertainty and negative are not the same thing. I wrote this. I'll get into that in a moment. So he adds this little oxygen, adds this little bubble into the identity question. And he says, you've got to figure out how A that equals A also somehow brings in not A. It's not the not A that's being brought in. It's the trace. It's the decalcomania that's being brought in. And because it's not really a trace either. It's the negative of the trace. Are you following this? Are you hearing what I'm saying? What are you hearing? Just.
Can you just say it again?
Sure. So identity is not just A equals A. That's sameness. Identity implies that it has a meaning, that it means something. And if something is going to mean something, then it's got to have a little extra element brought in. A little grit in the pearl. A little grit in the clam, or however the thing goes, in order to make a pearl. You can't have identity without some dirt. And when the word identity is being presented, it's being presented as something that is stretchy, let's say, that is not set up like a square, like, you know, A, not A, taken together makes the whole thing. Instead, it's being set up like a plane, like a I was going to say like a flower, but that just sounds too poetic. Like an energy cloud that has a center, but it's not a hard center. It's just something that creates centers, which Deleuze and Guattari are going to call nodal points, N-O-D-A-L, nodal points. And these points allow for orbiting around these points. These are little center, these are little points. So it doesn't mean that there's the center. There is simply the stretchiness of these connections that, depending on where you're coming from on the connection, on the plane, you are near the nodal point. Is that clearer, Greg? You sure? Lying through your teeth. Okay, you sure?
No, I understand the idea of something else being brought in, it's almost like if something's appropriate, you make a connection elsewhere.
Yeah, right, okay, so
An
yeah.
experience somewhere else will have resonance there and
Yeah.
make a difference.
Now, this is not dissimilar to networking. So I'm going to keep going back to this. Again, Heidegger is not speaking in a time period when the network was present, but that doesn't prevent us from stealing all of this in order to understand what's happening. So he says that you have this situation where A equals A is just stupid. It doesn't work. It's not really identity. It's just being the same. And so when you read this, don't have a nervous breakdown, because he then goes on to say what is really important is I equals I. So you're like, okay, you know. So just ignore that for the time being, because we'll get into why that's important. But he says A equals A, as long as you understand that there's also within that equation the stepping back. The stepping back from A equals A. So now you have a storytelling of relation. So for Hegel, what becomes the critical point here is contradiction. Life is established on the basis of contradiction. All that there is plus all that there's not, taken together creates the universal. But that's not Heidegger. What Heidegger is saying is all that matters is the relation. The relation is what establishes meaning, identity, difference. But now he wants to get into this in a much deeper way. Are we okay? Can we get into a deeper way? Can I get into the next level? Can you just go to the next page so we can see how to do it? I think this should be, yeah. All right, well done. And now you know some Harper and Row. Okay, no, yep. No, keep going. No, sorry. Introduction, yeah, keep going. A little bit more, a little bit more. Whoop, stop. There, back. There. God, I'm glad you're doing it, because I always, okay, that's good enough right there. Okay, so, now, are we ready to look at Heidegger? To really look at him, okay. So he starts off with Parmenides. See where it says Parmenides, two lines down? Parmenides. For the Greeks in the room, how do we pronounce Parmenides?
Parmenides.
Parmenides, of course. Okay. Yes. Okay. Parmenides. Anyway, now what that person says. When did Parmenides live? When did he live?
4,000 years.
The 5th century. Anyway, it wasn't yesterday, right? It wasn't like, it was a while back. What do you think he looked like? Beard. That's it?
Serious eyebrows.
Yeah, serious eyebrows.
White hair.
White hair. I had a very different image of him. I had him looking like a little bit of an athlete myself. I had him in little sandals and toed out to, anyway. So I have him as a very young character running around. What he says, which people thought was just phenomenal, was thought and being are the same. Okay, now, what is being said here, and why everybody goes, wow, that's fantastic, and bring out the champagne, that's really incredible, is that what's being addressed is not quite at the same level as the Cartesian move on where Descartes says, I think, therefore I am. What's being said here is that the ability to grasp, the ability to be able to see that one is being pulled outward in order to grasp and then take it back to your den, that ability to go out and grasp and bring it back has a skill. That's your Techne. The skill of, because you can go out and grasp all you want and take things back to your house and I don't know, go on QVC and buy things and just, you know, become a hoarder. That's not what's going on here. The grasping is a very specific kind of grasp. There's an art to it. What's the art? The art is that when, it's not so much that you know in advance what you're grasping, but you know that when you grasped it, it makes something stick. It has like it works like it has texture to it. And this grasping, whether or not you literally pick it up in your hand, or whether or not your mind picks it up in its hand, it grasps and sticks. So being and thought become the same. Now, not in the sense that the body is translated into a thought, but it's the other way around. The thought is translated into the body. So if you have A equals A, all you're saying there at that point is that thought is what exists, and it's disembodied. But for Heidegger and Parmenides, and Telos and whatever, for this group, it's how thought becomes sensuous. That is to say, how thought becomes body. But it's a body, a famous body without organs that Deleuze talks about, we talked about last week. It has a the network has a body. I'm going to put it like this. There is pulsate. It doesn't exist in this, well, it doesn't exist at all on one level, but without a certain kind of vitality, the network doesn't exist. The question is, how do you understand, how do you come to understand this? For Heidegger, what he's going to do in these two lectures, eventually, is develop the argument of how this something that looks like floating around, or people see it as just the brain, or something like this, how this is in fact one sort of axis, let's call it the magic carpet body, the immanent plane. This immanent plane is the identity. This immanent plane is this thing that sort of stretches in different directions, but has something that makes sense, that makes sense, that produces sense, produces the making of sense, whatever that sense is. It doesn't matter if it's A equals A, or I equals I, or toe equals toe, or scribble equals scribble. To make it make sense, it doesn't have to be useful, but it has to, quote, work. So the work of art is the ability to be able to have this identity, stroke, magic carpet, stroke, body, or the embodied thing that has these little air bubbles in it. Those little pockets. Those pockets are not pockets of nothing. Those pockets are pockets of black hole, or let's say vacuum, or ether. Or, all I'm trying to say is that it's not just nothing. It's not just this absence. It's not an abyssal logic. To attack the bikini. Yes. Does that make sense? Are you hearing this at all?
I didn't catch that last point. No.
See, I can tell when people look off. See, it's like I've got radar. It's like, yeah, what were you thinking? What you were thinking.
I was, yeah.
See, that's the point, though. You don't have to say. I mean, you do eventually have to say what you're thinking. Nobody gets out of here without saying. But if we start, let me back up slightly. If we start with Parmenides, who argues about the importance of the fact of speaking the body. Parmenides is speaking the body. Language and thought get embodied. So he's saying that this is, I guess, the first element. And these little air bubbles, I'm just going to leave these air bubbles for your imagination for the moment. Because the next step I mean, it's very hard doing this. You're being very good following this because it's tough to understand it. The next step that is being asked of you to think about with this move is that with the body, or this, let's say this sort of platform, it forms what's going to be called a groundless ground. That is to say, what the purpose of the ground is that you walk on, the ground, the basic ground, is that it gives you stability, gives you a way to read something. When you feel grounded, feel grounded. When you feel beside yourself, like you take off your head and carry it under your arm, but beside yourself, you're not grounded. And what Heidegger says is the problem is to understand how this ground operates in metaphysics, and particularly in Hegelian metaphysics, to understand how the body ground, or how the body being exists. Often people remove the being from the thinking, and either just have thinking as this big all-seeing eye, wrapping things up, A, or they just go to the body in this basic A equals A. Sweat equals sweat. There's nothing about the body that becomes dirty. The air bubble with a pocket, it's missing its dirt, missing its way of making a pearl. So the identity can't form. So what Heidegger is going to say is that between Parmenides and Hegel, there's been what he calls the forgetting of being. Now, I was using the air bubble thing slightly on purpose because there's a writer named Heideggerian, Lucy Heideggerian, I-R-I-G-A-R-A-Y, Lucy Heideggerian, who is a very complex feminist writer who hated Lacan. Sorry, they had their fights, you know, and she thought Lacan was a misogynist. He thought she was a jerk. So, I mean, really, you can imagine, they didn't get on. And so she ended up writing a lot of books, which were basically quite Lacanian. They're just slightly reversed or slightly different than what he's saying. But one of the things that she accuses Heidegger of doing is actually forgetting air. She actually has a book out called The Forgetting of Air in Heidegger. Because what she basically gets at is, with all of this toing and froing that we're going to get into in a minute, he forgets the dirt, even though he's going on about how important it is. So, just so we're clear as mud at the moment, where we are at the moment, is that we have A equals A. From the perspective of Heidegger stroke Parmenides, it is allowing this relationship between belonging and stepping back from belonging at the same time. And the thing to concentrate on is not the A and the A, but the equal sign. It's the equal sign that drags those things together. You are the equal sign in your work. You are what drags together the points. As artist, your identity is as an equal sign, is as an attractor. You pull things together. But in the pulling of things together, as this equal sign, you also hold them apart. So it's a simultaneous action. You bring together, you hold apart. You bring together, you hold apart. That's the equal sign. Brings together, holds apart. And remember, because we're going to get a little bit more complicated in this. I'm going to tell you the complication, and then we'll step back and we'll look at it. In the being the artist as equal sign, okay, person, as you are now the embodied equal sign, or the equal sign is the embodiment of you, you're able to grasp and pull things together. So it's not just grasping like this, I want. It's grasping like this, something like that. That's really a shame that that's going to be on the web. That's just not good. Even I can see that being really problematic. Let me put my glasses on so I look more serious now. Dear. Okay, what I'm trying to say is that there's a technique that makes those things stick to this equal sign creature, who's a living, breathing equal sign creature. Bottom line of augmented reality comes from this. Robotics is coming from it. We're going to, I'll start to show you how this gets developed. But anyway, so for the time being, just think how you are both keeping things apart and bringing things together. But in the keeping apart and in the bringing together, the whole paradigm of space and time completely changes. Now, that sentence for me gave me chills because I am obviously coming out with flu, but also because I think that it's really quite phenomenal when you think about space and time shifting so that rather than having this linear connected sense of time, what's being asked of you to think about is to think in terms of dimension. Whenever you think of time, think dimension and think speed. And think linear. So he's asking a big ask here of you. He's saying, if you're gonna understand identity, you gotta stop thinking about the closed box. You've gotta start thinking about how being is the embodiment and not the other way around. It's not that thought exists somewhere. It only, actually, I was going to say it only exists in the body, but that is going to confuse you a little bit, so I want to be clear you understand that he's not saying that if the tree fell in the forest and you weren't there to see it, it didn't fall. No, the tree fell. Okay, I want to be very clear here. If a tree fell in the forest and you weren't personally there to supervise its fall, too bad, it still fell. So he's not saying that you have to be present or that the human has to be present in order for it to be real. He's saying that reality is dirty. Reality has this bit in it that you need to get that creates this kind of magic carpet, or what we're going to call a plane of immanence. So for example, Gregory, when you went to Japan and you started working with paper, your trajectory was also climbing a mountain. That was the mountain of what does this paper got to do with me? So the physicality of the process was as real as literally going on a mountain trip, right? And you needed to, in order to get it, it was important for you to be there, be in it, be in the moment, as it were. You know, and to be there, to be in the moment, is how one begins to grasp identity, the meaning of how it works. You don't know really what you learned when you went there. You might not know for a while what it is you learned, because you're not learning in that way. You're learning through the body. It's a very different thing. You learn, and what's odd about this comment is that it's going to have more resonance for the network than any other form of society that we've gotten up to this point. Questions so far? I feel like I'm killing you here.
Does this have any relationship, going back a bit, to sort of Keats' idea of negative capability, when you're...
Did you say Keats?
Keats. Yeah. The idea of negative capability, where you're sort of... You're kind of overloading, but you're somehow just... It's when you were doing that sort of pushing part, pulling back, it's that just about keeping hold. I think there's something about not panicking.
Don't panic anyone. You know, you
that's
are
that's
an equal
a very
sign.
simple idea, but
yeah.
The complexity of it. I think he used the phrase in a letter to his brother, but I can't quite remember the full. But it was the similarity.
Well, it's as long as you, if that works for you, that could in fact be the case. I'm not 100% sure because I'm not familiar with that particular position, but it's just this dual thing that's going on, pulling together, keeping apart. That's the, yeah.
Sorry.
Voice.
Does it link to the secret?
Mhm.
Does it link?
And can you explain how it would?
Well, I think that it seems like a really good way of imagining that piece of grit in the relationship between your body and the way you kind of take on the world, or the way you kind of carve out your identity within the world, is that the thing that makes the identity quite dynamic, or that kind of energy, is the secret.
That's very, yes, I think that's definitely something worth developing. It's not what he's saying, but it's what Leotard says. Exactly how he develops it. But yes. Any other questions? Yes. Can you say it louder? Because
how difficult is it to identify that the grit is there?
Well, that's a question I throw back to you as an artist. What do you think? How do you identify the grit?
How do you know it's there? What is it that makes all of that
stick?
Yeah.
Stick, not stick, stick, not stick. Anybody have an idea?
I don't want to put Greg on the spotlight, but there's
Greg on the spot.
But talking of the secret thing, then what you said this morning about the secrets in your work that you don't want shared, and it's almost like those are the things that have helped you form that work. The audience don't need to see them, but they were the thing that you gathered stuff around. Does that?
Yeah,
maybe or an experience of making things appropriate or non-appropriate.
Yeah. So there's
I'm
that.
sorry, I
the
missed
grit
your thing this morning. I was called away to a stupid meeting. Yes.
So the grit on its own wouldn't mean anything to us really, but it's what you've done with that grit of the secret.
Is this not like a catalyst? I've heard it referred to as a catalyst before now.
What, the secret or the grit?
Is that different?
Yes, this is different because the catalyst suggests a direction, a linear, a linked direction. The catalyst is almost like an unfolding or a shot put. Whereas this is, what's being said here is that you have a network, but it's not self-evident which way it gets propelled. It gets propelled the way it gets propelled, which is kind of annoying in a sense. That's the first part of this. Was there another question over here? Yeah.
I was wondering whether the grasp,
Just a bit louder, I don't think.
I was wondering whether the grasp was sort of, you could call it a survival, sort of not necessarily in the caveman sense, but as an artist or as just getting by. The way that you form those collections is a sense of surviving.
Well, it's a sense of getting your little boat or your little plane, like a magic carpet plane.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see it. Anybody see the story of Pi yet?
Yeah.
One person has, you've seen it. What? Yeah.
Yep. The Life of Pi.
The Life of Pi, that's it, The Life of Pi. Yeah. This is, it's sort of like The Life of Pi. What, did you like it?
Yeah, I was really enjoying it.
Yeah. Did you like it? Did you think that which story was the real story?
The one that doesn't seem so real.
Yes, totally agree. Yes. In fact, when they ended the movie, I was thinking, why did they have that ending in there? It's stupid. That that just ruined the. They should have. And then I realized that is the thing. And so it's an interesting little bite in the tail. Anyway, you're right. It's a survival thing, but here's why it's a survival thing. Now, for the Heideggerians in the world that are listening to this, close your ears now, okay? Because it's going to upset you. But what Heidegger is saying here, so let's see if let's don't write in. I have people responding to these tapes. Actually, they have very nice responses. But here's the thing. How do you know what you're doing is making the cohering if you're in it, if you are the equal sign? And so what Heidegger is saying is that the problem with metaphysics and the problem with the way in which the world has been understood until Heidegger has come along is that there is this outside position around where being exists or even where thought exists. It sits outside and then it comes in and it looks at the problem. Whereas he's saying you have to come up with a way of understanding how art makes art, or how the artist makes the artist, or how being makes the being. Can you scroll down a little bit further? I'm sorry about if you do this. To if we get down to yeah, just right there for a second. Yeah, okay. So the last sentence on page 7, where Stambaugh writes, metaphysics has asked the question of being, but only to bring being in relationship with beings as their ground. So in other words, what is being said here is that, can you think of a society, a social, a moment, that is the thing that gives coherence, rather than thinking that there's already a ground, there's already something on the table, or in fact a table? Can you think of just the is, just the present, without having to bring in a whole edifice of things, a whole way of thinking, a whole building of thinking how that meaning can be established as meaning? Because what I'm thinking that you're not hearing, and maybe it's just because I'm just sensitive to your silence, but the ground is used as an expression that says, this is, it's like going to a dictionary. You know, what does it mean to talk about, I don't know, a book? A book is something where you go read, blah, 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 you go to a dictionary to find out the answer. He's saying that you'll never find an answer in a dictionary. You only, like if you were going to learn about art, you wouldn't go to a dictionary to find out about art. You'd go to the moment of understanding how something creates that cohesion. And it's that cohesion is what eventually is called a ground. But it's a fake ground, it's not a real ground. It doesn't actually exist, that cohesion. The cohesion is very ephemeral. The cohesion has a different relationship to time and space. Clovis, you going to say something? No, just breathe out. Yeah.
I just wondered, is that in relation, if we go back to Kierkegaard, that aspect of, kind of the aspect of trembling, that
it's the tremble. Yes.
Is that the same, is Heidegger talking about that?
Yes, you could say it's the tremble. Yeah, that's well through. How are you hearing this? Is it just like killing you, or you like, you hear, is Heidegger just like, you're ready to like, okay, all very interesting about Heidegger, but let's continue. If you just scroll down, I think it's on page 13. So if you just, although I see something here. Okay, no, never mind. Go to page 8. Okay, so now, you see where he has, you just stop there, that's fine, thank you. Where he says Dasein. See that word Dasein? Who speaks German here? Damn. Okay. How do you pronounce that?
As you did Dasein.
Now, how do you understand that word? What does that word literally mean?
Well, literally means to be in the moment.
Okay.
To be here.
Okay.
When you're right now.
Right. So we're all in the moment, right? We're all awake. Now, what it also means is the there, or the here. Dasein, this here. The here. Now, stay with me on this, okay? Just listen to it for a little bit, and then you can like grab some Diet Coke or something. Just listen to this. He calls Dasein capital B being. See, notice there's capital B being, and he says that or Stambaugh is saying the very relationship itself as the relationship of man and being. Okay, as. Not is, as the relation, the equal sign is the relation of man and being. Man belongs to being, and being belongs to man. Sorry about having used the man word, but we're just going to do it for the time being. Because actually how it's translated in other places is even more hilarious. It's little b being. So try and remember that man, tiny being, entity, these are all words that fit into the man section. And then big B, being. And you are the artist holding together man and being. You are the equal sign. Sticking, you are the as. Okay? Now, yes?
So we are a bridge.
A bridge, yes. For the time being, see it as a bridge, although it's a funny kind of bridge. It's a wormhole bridge. It's, you remember when I bent down the future and the past together? And you could go through that? The wormhole? You don't remember that?
So, because we're keeping apart,
now I don't remember that.
kind of keeping apart and pulling together,
yes,
as an equal sign, we're keeping apart and pulling together. But the things don't happen in the same space and the same time, don't they? So we basically jumping between time, between space, while keeping them together and apart.
See, now you know where you're really exhausted, because you've been doing all this space travel. Yeah. You're right, but not completely, because you're still thinking linear. So you're thinking you're jumping in between time when, in fact, what if you were just a lot of different dimensions all at the same time? Another series of goosebumps for me. Okay, what if you weren't just one time and then going to another time and then going to another? You were many times. That's why this bridge is accurate up to a certain point, but it's also a dimension. It's allowing you to go to different wormholes.
Because we're thinking in terms of identity.
Can you?
Purely.
Yes.
Because our identity goes that way and that way and that way.
Right. And so don't think
it's not about our history and our future. It's our identity.
Yes. So don't think of the equal sign in this kind of flat sense. Would love an art picture. Don't think of it in a flat sense. Think of it as though the equal sign had itself substance or body. It was, I don't know, fat or wide or something, infinitely in all directions. And so it pulls all directional things to itself. Now, the one side is pulling, in this example, is Dasein, is being, is the there. The there is over there where Michaela is. Michaela for the moment is going to be Dasein. I for the moment is I'm going to be little man, little b being. I am pulled toward Michaela because I belong to being. Michaela, in the same time, is pulled toward me because being belongs to me. Now, so that we don't collapse into a blob, we have the equal sign, which both keeps us apart and keeps us together. So we are attracted and repelled at the same time. So one wants to belong, one wants to go to the there. And the there, this is like Yvonne's word, can be invented, not invented. Well, maybe it could be invented as well, but anyway, it's invented. The there could be an invented, or actually your work as well, this invented sense of the there. You're pulled to an invented sense. That's why instinct, Tanya, has nothing to do with this. One's not pulled instinctually. One's pulled because one wants to see. One's pulled because of curiosity. One's pulled because of no reason. One's pulled because you're bored. When, you know, what happens if I just do that? Place blows up. You know, so you're pulled towards something, and at the same time, you're pulled away from it. So there's this pulling together and this taking apart. So what Heidegger says, the relationship between little b being and big B being, this air bubble that gets in the way, this equal sign, this thing that's in the middle of this kind of, going to be taken together, is a plane, a ground, but it's a ground without an actual structure. So they call it a groundless ground. It gives meaning because it's able to create this kind of vacuum seal of being attracted to the Dasein and being repelled by it. You got that so far? And what that is called, apart from the many other things we've called it, magic carpet ride, artist, but what it's called in, let's say formal places, so when you go to dinner parties and you start talking like this, you say, well, that is the magic carpet ride, and they'll, okay, no. It's called a discourse. So the discourse that's created between Dasein and little b being, or the space, the thing that isn't closed down and isn't opened up. It isn't infinitely going up in all directions. It isn't completely slapped together. That thing, that's a discourse. And it's that thing that inframes. And that's precisely how the web works as a network. It both brings in and does like so, but on infinite levels. So it's mind-boggling what goes on. Now what, what's his name, Einstein comes up with, Albert. And one of the things I love about Albert is that, he was never formally educated. It's so fabulous. He's a real romantic hero. He's working in some sort of shop somewhere, and he comes up with this idea, I found this idea about, sort of the way things can be attracted and the way things can be kept apart. And I think we're going to call it relativity. And it was like, no, that's not what we know in terms of proper physics. You have no education, go away. So he did. He went away and he invented the whole of relativity. So what's happening here is this is the first attempt to explain how something gets made into a coherent something. Your pieces of work become these discourses. They grab and they separate. And if they're not doing that, they ain't gonna work. That's the secret. That's the real secret. You can walk into a room, and you can look at a piece of work, and if it's not grabbing and repelling at the same moment, if it's not setting up that discourse, whatever that discourse is, it ain't gonna work as art. So he's trying to show you how the meaning gets embodied, but it's a body without organs. It's a plane of immanence. So he says that what he's trying to do, and this is what Stambaugh is trying to point out here, that these whole two lectures on identity and difference, he's not trying to look at the components of the relationship. He's not looking at what is man, what is being. He's looking at what a relation does. And if there's nothing else you learn from this particular lecture tonight, it's got to be just that. That the relation is something that exists because it is able to keep something apart and keep it together at the same time, which completely dislodges normal notions of time and of space, of being, of all the rest of this kind of stuff. Now, if you don't mind, I know you're writing, but sorry, so you ended up sitting in the hot seat there. If you just go down about, I think we're going to just keep going till we find the actual equation. Yeah, it goes into the there we go. Okay, stop. Thank you. Okay. So now, you always know you're in trouble when a philosopher starts a sentence with the simplest statement of this. Okay. You gotta love these people. Okay. The simplest statement of this can be found in the preface to Hegel's philosophy of law. Quote, the real is the rational and the rational is real. So, okay, knife in the head. Okay, so you think to yourself, what's that? Oh, okay, page 10. Because basically what this is saying is that thought becomes the system, and the system creates reality. And for anyone who thinks this is Hegel. And it's smart. It's really great. It's just not true. Or to put it slightly differently, it's true up to a certain point, and as I have said many times, is that if the world is creating relations and discourses, especially if it's in a power situation, there's the move to make it into a binary, to make it into an us-them, and to make it into a box. This is old political environments worth their salt do this. This is the usual trajectory of how something gets done. So the worst thing in the world that could have happened in the late 18th century, or the mid 18th century, was capitalism. Not because it created the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, no. It's because before it created that, before it was able to use value and exchange value and exploitation and all the rest of that stuff, before it could do any of that, what happened is that it was quite radical. It completely got rid of feudalism. It got rid of having to go trade off your daughter, or if you were the daughter, being traded off as a vessel to someone else in a matrimonial moment. It was radical capitalism. And the first person who said this was Marx, which is totally hilarious because he often gets, there's a wonderful statement of his in the Gothic program where he says, I can't stand these people who call themselves Marxists. It's great. Anyway, you should read this stuff. So, Marx is the one that said capitalism is completely radical. It's unbelievable. It destroyed feudalism because it allowed people to have this kind of chaotic way of organizing. But then it didn't, because at some point the positions get infected to such a way that it doesn't work. It doesn't work because what it starts doing is dividing and creating the bourgeoisie proletariat relationship of the mode of production. It totalizes. The same thing you could be said is happening with the network right now. When it first emerged in the 60s and 70s and 80s and possibly 90s, it was wild. It freaked out governments. There was no controlling it. It was very powerful. And hopefully it will remain powerful. This was Tim Berners-Lee plea. Please don't go to apps. Please don't go to internet. Stay with the web. The internet will create silos of knowledge, whereas the web only operates, as we're talking about, this lateral being belonging thing, and it's very it's anarchic, very difficult to control. So either you have to just shut it down, and yet it still keeps happening, somewhere keeps popping up the internet, or you figure out how to just control the discourses, because the internet is multiplying the discourses. This relation we're talking about here. It, unlike capitalism in this sense, it proliferates relation. It makes relations alive. And that's very bad if you're into the binary. Now, how are we doing? What are you hearing? My little speech. I think maybe we can go down one more little bit. I don't know if, are you too exhausted? Is this just too heavy at the moment? I know you're just taking it in now for the first time. You're doing an excellent job. It's tough because you have to learn things like groundless ground. Later on he talks about what he calls an onto-theologic. Theo meaning religion, onto meaning ground. You're dealing with something that tries always to get away from this understanding of how a relation is actually a relation. And why Heidegger, despite all of his, sort of political proclivities, which are problematic, he gets into the fact that it's the relation that we're looking at, not the endpoints of the relation. If you as an artist just focus on the endpoints of either side of what you're doing, you will not produce work. You will not, well, you might produce work, but you won't produce a work of art. And this is what he's going for here. Forget about getting to the end point. Get to the relation. Now, if you don't mind just skipping down, I'm trying to get to page, flip it up. 36. If you, just keep going. Now this is all about A is A, and and again, all the knife in the head stuff. Okay, now, if you just go up slightly, but in fact, we just stay with this footnote. We'll just stick with the framework. The framework or frame, Gestell, and we don't, I mean, if you want to learn the German word, speak to Anna. But what he's saying here is that this framework that gets established, this relationship between B, little b being, and big B being, when it works, it's what is called the event of appropriation. If you look down further, it says, thus you come into one zone, you come to where one belongs. It's the event of appropriation. This is what Fluxus was referring to as happening. Go back to the very early things we were talking about earlier. We were talking about at the start. So the framework is no longer a framework like a square or a framework like a universal. It's how something is able to connect because it can connect. That's the only reason. Now, there might be a lot of reasons why that reason. How come it works? Like abstract art is always a good one for this kind of thing. When you just picture, I don't know, picture Pollock. I mean, it's easier to do. If you saw a Pollock and you saw something else that, was just a lot of blobs on a canvas, it is conceivable that the blobs on the canvas done by somebody who didn't quite, quote, know what they were doing might work, but that Pollock could keep producing a Pollock. That's what's interesting about Pollock's abstraction. It's not that he just went crazy one day in his studio, thought, I think I'm just going to throw a lot of paint around. Started throwing it around, and then stood back and went, yeah, I like that, I like how that works. No, because he was able to keep doing, so what was he doing? How did he become the equal sign between those things that were going on? Because however he did it, that's why it's called a Pollock as opposed to a nobody or something else. That thing created the discourse, created the frame. It's the equal sign that creates the frame. Yeah.
We did that. The thing with Pollock is rhythm and repetition. And that constant repetition is going to prevent some tiny little chaos, or I've started to use the word.
No, chaos.
Some accidents will come off them.
Yeah.
And maybe leading to something else.
That's
imagine
right.
repetition and rhythm and movement.
Exactly. Just kind of, and so getting, absolutely. And it's exactly that kind of rhythm that he was enacting through the body that makes it happen.
Is it sort of an allowing? You're allowing it to happen.
You're allowing it to happen.
Yeah.
In our PhD seminar, it's that the thing comes to you. It's very different than you going to it. I mean, on one level, you may go to it as in going to the Dasein, but in fact, it's coming to you. It rises to greet you. Does that make sense to you?
You set the conditions for these things, don't you?
Yes.
The other thing is to recognise that it is there.
That's right. One has to recognize what lies before you as lying before you. So you know to take it, you know to grasp it. But the grasping isn't like group hug grasping. It's equal sign grasping. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay.
No, I might disagree with that.
Okay, go on.
I think you have to not know it You have to not know to grasp.
Okay, a better way of saying is, what do we mean by knowing? Because by knowing, I don't mean rationally sitting down and doing a little calculation and then going out and finding it. It's a different form. It's a body knowing. It's you know, without trying to sound really like, you know, we're gonna become flower children or something. Trust the body. I know it's a tough one.
Yeah, well,
I don't agree with that.
No, it's not that I don't agree. Yeah.
No, what is it though?
This just it being in the space. It's going back to that idea of the bubble or the secret or the bit that's held back or the bit that's not kind of objectified or kind of defined in some ways. Is that to me is the conflict, the equal sign.
But you see, we're not talking about an excess. We're not talking about a lack. We're not talking about secret as lack or as too much.
Yeah.
We're talking about something that is in it's part of the field. It's very difficult to. I might not be explaining this as well as I'd like to be, but we'll just keep, you know, bashing on the head. No, it's saying something very different as a result. It's trying to say, is there, you know, like the sciences, for example. I mean, sciences, you know, just swap things all the time. Claim to have, let's say, a way of doing analysis, you know, which tends to be quantifiable, and you know, surveys and statistics and quants and this kind of method. Is there a method? Never lie. Is there a method to art? There's certainly something that isn't scientific that still makes something work. This is what Heidegger is asking. Or this is one thing that he's suggesting. He's saying that the problem starts with the whole problem begins with not recognizing that identity isn't about something out there or something in here. Identity is the relation. That's what the identity is. But in order to make sense of it, one has to realize that that is a little complicated because, in fact, what it is a very energizing scenario. It's an event, or what he says, an event of appropriation. And that is part of all the postmodern, you know, arguments. It's this kind of, this thing called event of appropriation or happening. This is what's creating these different nodal points that go on. It is a very different, see, because up until this kind of way of presenting it, or, you know, up until Parmenides, so okay, pre-postmodern, or whatever, that way of looking at something doesn't involve a universal or a totalizing thought. It doesn't involve a monotheism. It involves a form of, let's say, religious thinking that is pagan, not monotheistic. And so it's coming from a very different, this is why you need to get a sense of how it's breaking these kind of other frames that are going on. Whether it works, whether it doesn't work, another issue altogether. But just so you know, we're only on page, like, I think 15 or something of a 77-page discussion. But just so you just getting a slice of this, just so you get the idea that identity has to do with you being an equal sign that creates, that the whole thing of which is called the event of appropriation. So the one side, the being, the Dasein, the thing stuck together. Now, I'm going to throw in one other thing before you break. And that is, why doesn't it collapse? Why doesn't it just float off? What is it about this attraction that works? That's the first question. The second question is, how do you get out of the attraction? How do you break out of that little magic carpet ride? So the answer to those both questions has to do with how Heidegger is going to develop the argument on difference. opposed to identity. But just so to give you a prequel to it, imagine that you are a little bee being on the side of a beach, and you're looking off into the tsunami called Dasein. Big thing that has the strength to drag you in because it's Dasein. It is the world. It has the ability to pull you in completely. So why doesn't that completely pull you in? One of the ways to think about this visually is to think of yourself as a swimmer in the equal sign section of the thing, trying to get out of a riptide. Do you know what a riptide is? What do they call them here? You know, an undertow.
Oh.
You know when you're swimming and and suddenly there's all this other activity underneath the thing and you get pulled out. So how do you get so that you're not pulled out to sea? Does anybody know? Does anybody?
You swim across it.
You swim across it. Ah, someone else is a lifeguard here, I see.
Yeah, I hate
No,
swimming.
but you hate swimming. But you're right, you swim across it. Now, of course, where's the across? It's like the same argument as, oh, just punch the shark in the nose. My luck, it'll have its mouth open when this happens. But the way there's something about a lateral move that's going to be part of this thing around difference. Because when we finish this and you still have your brain more or less intact, you will hopefully begin to see that the word identity already is calling forth totally different notions of space, speed, dimension, time. And in fact, that form of identity is going to make the argument that in reality there is no time. Time is distance, time is speed, time is many things, but the one thing it's not is like 3 o'clock in the afternoon anymore. In order to use it as an analysis. 3 o'clock in the afternoon is fine. It'll get you to a shop on time or to a class, but it's not going to make an analysis. People keep mistaking analysis, that form of time, for what he's saying. You have to have a totally different form of time, a discontinuous form of time. That's step one. Step two is then thinking about how this swimming across the riptide or undertow, how that actually happens while you're in the equal sign section of the problem. And the you that's in this is both the little b being, the Dasein, and also the swimmer that's making their mark. Okay, question?
Many, but not now.
Many. Questions? You have a question?
Yeah. Can it happen? Can we collapse with the Dasein?
Yes. And then what happens? Death.
Beautifully dead.
That's probably what most of us do most of the time. We're always collapsing in the Dasein.
That's right. And it is death.
It's rare to be.
That's right. That's exactly right. And that is why, no, that's exactly right. And that is why the argument goes that artists are the font of liberation. Not because you're just so good looking and wonderful, but because you don't collapse into the Dasein. And that takes a lot of guts, because it's not the normal or the usual rational way of doing it. That's the problem. The good news and the bad news, same news. You know?
So in that lateral swimming, it's because you are seeing both of those, because you're allowing yourself to see the small b being and the big b being as well.
You're not allowing anything. It's not that you're sitting there with a third person in there, giving you the you of
But it's being
another
aware that
you
you're in
giving
the
you
process
permission.
then.
Huh?
Being aware that well, not the process, but you're
There
in
is
the,
no awareness. You're a computer chip. You're not aware. You don't have intention in the same way. It doesn't mean that it's rote. We're getting into artificial intelligence. Actually, we're getting into intelligence, artificial or otherwise. Yes?
Just only related to my practice. and my process is just, I just go away from it. I just go away from it, I go and do something completely different, come back to it, and often I'll see a pattern, and often I'll see something that interests me, and then that's just what I do. It's just what I do.
But in doing that, that allows you, that's your swimming against the riptide. Because even though maybe physically you're taking yourself out of the situation, you're still in the equal sign section.
I imagine myself picking a swimmer out, actually.
You're never outside.
No.
You're in that, you're in this bit.
Yeah, okay.
And in order to swim laterally, does that make sense now?
Yeah, it does.
So you cannot escape, only you can die.
Yes, to clarify this as much as we can, it's just death, that's it. And that's another plus side.
But since it's here and here and power is strong to both sides, how can you collapse?
How can you collapse? Because Dasein's stronger.
Why?
Because it's the world.
Since the pulling and the drifting apart equal each other, how is it stronger?
They don't equal each other. So the real question is, how is it that they're able to keep that open? Because in fact, it's little old you against the world. No match. I say this with love. It's not going to work, fella. Dane?
I could try an example.
Okay, yeah.
My favourite example is birthday cards. Dasein, when someone's birthday, Dasein says you get someone a birthday card. It's what you do. No one told you to do it, but it's what Dasein tells you to do. And if you do that, you go buy a birthday card for someone, you become Dasein, you collapse A and A, you become A, you collapse into it, you are Dasein. That's the end of it. But if you don't, you move away, you create that difference between you and Dasein. You separate yourself and do something different. You make a card or bake a cake or something. Well, not bake cakes, that's the problem, but you find that you are separate from Dasein and you can do something different. That's the way.
Not exactly. It's a good try. I like the idea that Dasein could be telling you to buy a birthday card. I think that's fantastic. However, not buying the birthday card or making a different form of a birthday card than what Hallmark comes out with or Sainsbury or somebody is not going to break from that. There has to be something. Were you going to say something, Michaela?
It's maybe a bit linked to what you were saying. Is like instead of swimming across that thing, if I go completely into it and I'm completely taken by this attraction, but I use that force and as a repulsive force so that I can step out, could it work?
I guess so. I mean, the reason I'm thinking, one of the problems were the way we're posing it, but I'm only doing this so that people get the sense of an entity, because it really isn't really you against the world. It's not really that situation. What's really being said is that if one gets pulled into such a degree that there is no you any longer, so that's why the birthday card is not quite right, because if you get pulled in to such an extent that you lose yourself. I think a better example, sadly, is how do you fight against your parents, this crazy one. For all of you that go home, that have a home where you have parents that are still infantilizing you, so you go in and you become 3 years old, no matter how old you are, right? Where is Joe when this happens, Joe has now become completely swept into this thing. We can't find her. She can't find her. Nobody can find her. The only people who can find you are your Dasein, and they're seeing themselves. So they're not even seeing you. So the question is, how do you manage to get away from that pull? That's how strong it is. Yes?
Is it like mind and body, divine?
No division between mind and body. It's body. It's body sport, contact sport. God, Heidegger's contact sport. That would be a very interesting book.
Do you think then artists fluctuate between not losing their identity to going to the Dasein and coming back again?
Yes. Yes.
So they have a choice between they actually can go with the flow
and then come out of the flow and ride against it.
Well, it's not choice in that sense. It is, one is, you know, let's say you happen to be on the beach and you looked up and there was a tsunami. You wouldn't say, now, do I have the choice to run, or will I be, you know, you're just brought in to it. There's no choice in that sense. So the question is, knowing that these kind of powers exist, how does one deal? And what's happening is that an artist, or anyway, what we're using as the artist example, is able to create this equal sign within the tsunami, let's say, within the flotsam and jetsam. Yeah, Kate? Just a nodding.
I'm still about so.
Okay, dear. Kate, yes?
What struck me is the
side
the
signifier?
equal sign.
Yeah.
Is like the bar of the limitation between the signifier and the object.
No, the equal sign
It's like
is
with a gap.
yeah, well, and that gap is important because that's the gap
With the air in it.
with the air in it.
Yeah.
With Saussure, there is no air.
Yeah.
There's only fractions.
Yeah.
Whereas, because what we're going to go with this, you might just want to just remember this for next week. This is the beginning of understanding how fractals operate as identity, not fragments. Fractal. Yeah. This is hard. I know it's hard. You're doing very well by not dying. But we're going to end now before we really do die. Could you try and give it a go with the with this identity difference? It's tough stuff. We won't be on it forever because the course will end. But what you just think body, no mind versus body. But if there has to be, you know, one or the other, just pick the body. Okay? And does the body think? Not does the mind think in the body. Does the body think? And that's where we're going with this. It's a very different way of understanding how things work. Okay. Let's see what it looks like. We're not going to see what it looks like. You can turn around. That requires you standing up.
Thinking about faces.
Oh no. Oh my God. That's good. I don't know. Does it make sense? What do you think, people?
Yeah. The lights is a bit different. Can I switch on the lights?
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah. Origin of bridge. Very good. Okay. That's it. Bye. Oh, okay. You need more. Please. I really appreciate you sending me
Everything is fine. Fine. Not step out.
I'm done. It's all okay. Slow walking. Slow everything.
Oh, that's working.
there.
Just